The storm tore across the plains with a fury Sarah had only imagined before, conjured by fireside tales spun by her mother's voice. Thunder rolled like a war drum, its echoes swallowed by the roar of wind. Wagons creaked and groaned under the onslaught, their rattling shells straining against the tempest. The downpour crashed against wood and canvas, 1,000 icy needles stabbing through the fabric of the night. Sarah clung to the rough wooden edge of the wagon, her knuckles white, fingers slick with rain. Her breath hitched, and her chest tightened with each gust of wind that screamed past her ears. Panic twisted her stomach, a wild, clawing sensation that nearly overtook her. She pressed herself deeper into the corner of the wagon, away from the flapping canvas and the wild, hungry night. Sarah. Her mother's voice. Strain cracking. A hand had grasped her shoulder moments before, squeezing tight enough to leave bruises, but Sarah had shrugged it away in her terror. The horses had reared, their screams almost human, before the wagon jolted violently. She'd fallen, rolling across the splintered floor until her back slammed against the wheel well. Now, the silence was the most unsettling part. No voices. No footfalls. Just the storm's guttural rumble. Sarah stretched her arms out, her hands meeting nothing but wet air and cold wood. Her mother's voice was gone, swallowed by distance and storm. She couldn't see the others, couldn't hear their shouts. The world had narrowed to the storm and the dark and the pounding of her own heart. It was the first time she'd been truly alone. Her fingers trembled as she crawled forward, finding the wagon's edge with a sharp splinter of pain. She winced but welcomed the sting. It was real, tangible. She eased herself over the side, the mud sucking at her boots as she landed hard on the soaked ground. Ma. Her voice was a thread, weak and shaking. Pa. The rain pummeled her, ran down her face, soaked her dress until it clung to her skin like a shroud. Anybody? No answer came. She strained her ears, every hair on her neck prickling, as she tried to parse sound from noise. Her senses stretched, compensating for the dark that had always been her world. The storm masked everything, hiding danger and safety alike. She took a step forward and nearly toppled, her foot slipping on the slick ground. Another step, firmer this time, but the mud clung stubbornly to her shoes, anchoring her in place. Sarah's chest heaved. They wouldn't leave her. They couldn't. Her mother's fingers clawing at her arm in the dark. That had been real. But the thought of Caravan moving on without her, the wagons lumbering forward through the rain and mud, shook her more deeply than the storm ever could. Ma, she screamed, her voice hoarse. Pa. Her throat burned, raw from the effort. She kept calling, the names breaking down into sobs until she crumpled into the mud. The storm kept raging, indifferent to her despair. She didn't know how long she lay there, her fingers sinking into the earth as if to find something solid, something that couldn't be taken from her. The wetness seeping into her skin was more than rain. It was the chill of the night, the cold of abandonment. Eventually, the world grew quieter. The storm ebbed, leaving only the occasional mutter of thunder and the pattering of drizzle. Sarah's shivers grew violent, her teeth chattering. She forced herself to her feet, her legs like lead. The air tasted different now, fresher. The scent of pine filtered through the remnants of the storm. Her other senses reached out, questing through the darkness. A rustle, almost imperceptible, caught her attention. She held her breath. Was it them? Her family? Come back to find her? But the sound was softer, stealthier. Something moving with deliberate caution. Her pulse quickened, fear buzzing beneath her skin like a hive of angry bees. She stumbled backward, her boot catching on a stone. Her arms flailed before she caught herself. It was then she heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not the heavy, uneven steps of her parents, but something lighter, almost feline in its grace. She twisted, her ears tilting toward the sound. It grew nearer, the rhythm steady and sure. "Who's there?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm lost." For a moment, there was nothing but the breeze stirring the wet grass. Then a voice, deep, measured, each word carefully enunciated. "You are not alone." She spun toward the sound, her body taut with terror and something else. Hope, perhaps. The voice was unfamiliar, rich, with an accent she couldn't place. But it was human, and that was enough. "Please," she whispered. "Can you help me?" Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then the voice spoke again, closer this time. "You are far from your people." She nodded, her hands curling into fists. "Yes. I got lost. The storm, they're gone. I can't find them." A pause. She imagined eyes studying her, assessing. "They left you?" "No." Her voice rose, defensive, but the truth hollowed her chest. They must be looking for me. They have to be." The stranger did not answer. His presence was a weight in the darkness, solid and unsettling. When he spoke again, his words were like stones, heavy and deliberate. "The land is harsh. Alone, you will not survive." The statement landed like a blow. She fought against it, her fists clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. "I'll find them. Or they'll find me. They have to." A faint rustle of movement. Then she felt it, a hand on her arm, firm but not unkind. She gasped, her head jerking toward the touch. His skin was rough, his fingers calloused from work she could only guess at. "You are blind," he said, the words more observation than question. She swallowed hard. "Yes." Another silence. She braced herself for pity or dismissal. Instead, the stranger's voice carried a different weight. "Blindness is not weakness, but alone it is danger." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She couldn't argue. Her own body betrayed her, trembling, shivering, weak. The mud sucked at her feet, and her arms ached from holding herself upright. What are you going to do?" she asked, the question tumbling from her lips before she could stop it. The man's hand left her arm. For a moment, she feared he would leave her there, just as the others had. But then his voice reached her, quiet but certain. "I will guide you." The relief was so overwhelming that her knees nearly buckled. She nodded, her voice a broken thread. "Thank you. Please. I don't even know your name." "Hawk," he replied, his voice like the low rumble of distant thunder. "Come. The night is long, and the land is unforgiving." He took her hand, and this time she did not pull away. Sarah stumbled after Hawk, his grip steady on her arm as he guided her over the rough, uneven ground. The cold had seeped into her bones, leaving her sluggish and unsteady. His fingers were calloused but sure, their warmth radiating through the chill. It was strange to trust a stranger so readily, but the alternative was death. She clung to him like a lifeline. They moved in silence, broken only by the crunch of their feet against wet leaves and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. Every so often, Hawk's hand would tighten, an unspoken command to stop. She strained her ears, desperate to hear whatever danger he sensed. Sometimes it was the snap of a branch beneath some creature's weight, other times the mournful cry of an owl. Her imagination twisted each sound into something sharp and deadly. He kept their pace brisk, unrelenting despite her stumbling. She knew he must be frustrated by her slowness, by the way her feet tangled in roots and her arms swung clumsily to find balance. But he said nothing, his patience a force as tangible as the ground beneath her feet. Once, her toe caught on a hidden stone, and she pitched forward with a startled yelp. His grip tightened, holding her upright before she could crash to her knees. "Careful," he said, his voice low. "The earth is treacherous here." Sarah forced herself to nod, swallowing her embarrassment. "I'm trying." His response was a soft grunt, but she detected something almost like amusement in its undertone. As their journey continued, she realized he spoke little. Commands, brief acknowledgments, words of caution. They all carried the same bluntness, the same efficiency. But it was not cruelty. Hawk simply used his words like a tool, sparingly and with purpose. They walked until Sarah's legs burned and her feet throbbed. When they finally stopped, she collapsed onto a patch of dry grass, her chest heaving. Hawk's footsteps retreated briefly before returning. He pressed something into her hands, its rough texture familiar. Bread. Stale but welcome. She tore into it greedily. The silence stretched, only broken by the sound of her chewing. Eventually, Sarah found her voice. "Thank you," she said, her words muffled by the bread. "For helping me." Hawk's answer came after a pause. "I help because I must. The wild takes without mercy." Sarah swallowed hard. "And you? Do you live out here alone?" "For now." "Why?" Another pause, thicker this time. She sensed him weighing the worth of words. "My people are far. I walk where I choose." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite place. Sadness, perhaps. Or defiance. Sarah wanted to ask more, to pick apart his silences and find the truth beneath. But she didn't press. She was grateful for his guidance, and that was enough. For now. They resumed their march the next morning, her muscles aching from the relentless pace. Hawk continued to lead her with the same quiet efficiency, his grip strong and unwavering. She tried to pay attention to the land beneath her feet, to the way the ground shifted from grass to soil to rock. He pointed out plants by touch, describing their scents, their uses. Some were for healing, others for food. He spoke as if this knowledge were sacred, something passed from elder to child in voices like his, rich and steady, bearing the weight of generations. As the days dragged on, Sarah found herself growing accustomed to his presence. The silence between them felt less like a chasm and more like a bridge. He taught her how to recognize the direction of the wind by how it struck her cheeks, how to find water by the scent of moss and the coolness of air. Her senses grew sharper, her movements less clumsy. The wilderness, once an endless expanse of terror, became something almost familiar. They rested by a stream one evening, its babble constant and soothing. Hawk's voice broke the quiet. "Why were you left behind?" Sarah flinched. The question had coiled around her chest since the night of the storm, tightening until breathing itself felt like a struggle. "I wasn't left behind. Not on purpose. The storm, it was so loud. I got separated." The words tumbled out, raw and splintered. "They wouldn't leave me. They can't have." Hawk's silence was not reassuring. It was heavy, its weight pressing against her ribs. "You do not believe they are looking for you?" he asked finally. "I don't know." The admission stung, bitter as bile. Maybe they tried. Maybe they couldn't find me. Or maybe it was just easier to keep moving. Her voice cracked. "I don't know." Hawk's footsteps approached. He lowered himself beside her, the air around him warmer, somehow. "To be lost is to be forgotten," he said, the words carrying a sharp edge. "But you are not forgotten. You are here. You endure." Sarah frowned. "Enduring isn't the same as being found." "No," he admitted. "But it is the beginning." His words left her unsettled. Yet they also carried a truth she couldn't ignore. As long as she kept moving, kept breathing, she was not truly lost. Not completely. They resumed their journey the next morning. Hawk's lessons grew more detailed, more insistent. He drilled her on how to listen for water, how to differentiate animal calls from the rustle of leaves. His patience was unyielding, his expectations high, and slowly she rose to meet them. They encountered a wild boar one afternoon. Sarah felt it before she heard it, the air suddenly sharp with a musk she couldn't identify. Hawk's hand clamped over her wrist, holding her still. "Do not move," he whispered. "Listen." The beast snorts and huffs rumbled through the underbrush. Its hooves pounded against the earth, the sound of power and hunger. Hawk's fingers remained locked around her wrist until the animal's noises faded into the distance. Only then did he release her. "You heard it before I did," he said, his tone almost approving. "I smelled it," Sarah replied. "Something sour. Like old meat." "Yes. You are learning." The praise was rare, but it filled her with warmth nonetheless. The next morning, Hawk allowed her to take the lead. His presence remained just behind her, close enough to catch her if she stumbled, but far enough to force her to rely on her own senses. The exercise left her drenched in sweat and nerves, but with each step, her confidence grew. They settled for the night under the canopy of a twisted oak, its branches creaking softly in the breeze. Hawk built a small fire, its glow flickering against Sarah's closed eyes. The air held a chill, but the fire's warmth soothed her aching limbs. "Hawk," she asked softly. Yes. Why are you helping me? The question had been brewing for days, festering beneath her skin like a thorn. You could have left me. Why didn't you? Hawk's silence stretched so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, threaded with something she hadn't heard before. Regret, perhaps. Or sorrow. Once I left someone behind. Someone I should have protected. I cannot change what was done, but I can keep you from sharing their fate. The fire crackled, its heat suddenly insufficient against the chill that crept through her. The pain in his words was a wound laid bare, something raw and unhealed. Sarah reached out, her fingers finding his arm. Thank you, she whispered. He said nothing, but his hand covered hers, strong and steady. The sun had begun to burn hotter as their journey pressed forward, the air thick with the scent of parched earth and pine. Sarah's steps had grown more sure, her feet learning to navigate the treacherous terrain with a precision she once thought impossible. Hawk had eased his guidance, allowing her to find her own way even as he shadowed her every step. She felt him as a constant presence, watchful, unyielding. They walked in silence, a language they had come to share. It was not comfort, but something akin to it. Trust forged through necessity and tempered by hardship. The world remained dark to her, but the land spoke in other ways. She had learned to read the brush of wind against her skin, the shifting rhythms of insects and birds. And most of all, she had learned to read him. Hawk's breathing grew tense, his footfalls shifting from smooth to cautious. It was a warning, subtle but unmistakable. Sarah slowed, her senses questing outward. The air felt different, heavier. Sounds reached her ears, faint but distinct. Voices, human voices, distant but drawing closer. She felt Hawk's hand on her shoulder, fingers curling in a grip neither gentle nor harsh. It spoke of urgency. Others come, he said, his voice low and sharp. They hunt. Who? She asked, her throat tightening with a fear she couldn't name. Men from your world. They search the land like wolves, hunting, not seeking. His voice grew bitter. They are not your kin. Sarah's pulse quickened. But why? Because I walk this land, Hawk replied. Because they are greedy and afraid. And because blood has been spilled where none should have been. What happened? She pressed, her voice tight. Hawk's silence was the kind she had come to understand. Guarded, deliberate. He never spoke of his past, his words always rooted in the immediate present. But there was something different now, a tension woven through his voice. Long ago, he said finally, I protected what was mine. But the settlers came, pushing us further into the wilds. They broke the earth, cut down the trees. And when my people defended what was ours, blood was spilled. Your family? She asked, her voice small. Yes. The word was a blade, clean and cold. They hunt me because I will not bend to them. They call me outlaw, savage. It matters not. They kill what they cannot control. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Hawk's kindness had not been an act of charity. It had been defiance. A refusal to let the world dictate who he could save and who he must let perish. His own grief was tangled with hers, their losses knotted by the same threads of cruelty and survival. Will they kill you? She asked, the words trembling between them. If they find us. His tone was matter-of-fact, resigned but not defeated. And they will not ask questions before drawing blood. A chill crept through Sarah's veins. She had feared the wilderness, the blind expanse of darkness that stretched out beyond her reach. But it was the men who hunted them, now, that truly terrified her. What can we do? She asked. We move faster. We leave no trail. And when the time comes, his voice hardened. We fight. The simplicity of his words struck her. Fight. It seemed such an impossible thing. She had always been the one who needed protection, who depended on others to shield her from the cruelties of the world. But Hawk's resolve was unyielding, and she drew strength from it. They quickened their pace, Hawk's urgency transforming into swiftness. His commands grew sharper, more frequent. He guided her over streams, through dense thickets, always careful to erase their tracks. She could hear the tension in his breathing, the way his voice tightened when he gave directions. It was fear, she realized. Not for himself, but for her. The pursuer's presence became more tangible with each passing day. Their voices carried on the wind, curses and threats mingling with the rustling leaves. Sometimes Sarah could even hear the distant clop of hooves, the metallic clinking of bridles. The men were relentless, their hunger for blood as relentless as the sun above. On the fourth night of their flight, Hawk led her into a cave hidden by overgrown foliage. The air inside was cool, the darkness absolute. For Sarah, it was a strange comfort to be surrounded by blackness that matched her own. Hawk built a fire, its heat modest but welcome. She could feel him sitting beside her, his presence a solid wall against the fear creeping up her spine. "Will they find us?" she asked, her voice a thread stretched thin. "If we are careless." Hawk's tone was clipped, but there was something beneath it. Fatigue, perhaps, or doubt. "We can't keep running forever," she said, the words slipping free before she could stop them. "No," he admitted, "but we can make them think we have gone another way. Confuse them. Delay them." She sensed the strain in his voice, the weariness he tried so hard to hide. "You're tired." "Everyone grows tired." His voice was rough, laced with frustration. "But it does not matter. We will survive." Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I'm not a child," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "You don't have to protect me from the truth." There was a pause. When Hawk spoke, his voice was gentler than she had ever heard it. "You are stronger than you know, but strength does not make us invincible." She nodded, swallowing the knot of fear lodged in her throat. "Teach me." Hawk's silence stretched long enough that she wondered if he had heard her. Then, slowly, his hand took hers and placed something cool and heavy in her palm. A knife. Its blade was smooth, the edge sharp against her fingers. "If the time comes," he said, his voice like iron, "you must be willing to do what is necessary." Sarah's hands trembled as she tightened her grip around the knife. The thought of using it was sickening, but the alternative was worse. "I'll do it." "Good," Hawk replied, a grim approval coloring his words. "Tomorrow we will make them believe we have gone west. They will follow our trail. And when they do, we will strike from the shadows." Sarah's throat tightened. She had never wielded a weapon before, had never considered herself capable of violence. But the world she had known was gone, torn away by the cruelty of others. And if she was to survive, she would have to become something new, something fierce. The fire crackled softly, the heat licking at her skin. She listened to Hawk's breathing, steady and measured. Her own heart raced, the rhythm chaotic and wild. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Determination, resolve. "Will you leave me?" she asked suddenly, the question sharp and desperate. "No," Hawk said, his voice steady. "We are bound now, by blood and by loss. I will not leave you." His words settled deep within her, a foundation upon which she could build her courage. Whatever the future held, she would face it. Not alone, not helpless. The night pressed in around them, but Sarah held fast to the knife, its weight a promise. They would not run forever. The dawn crept over the horizon with a pallid, merciless glow. Sarah had learned to feel the shift in the air, the way warmth seeped into the chill of night like an enemy reclaiming lost ground. She tightened her grip around the knife Hawk had given her, its weight both reassuring and alien. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the terror of what lay ahead. They had spent the night crafting their deception, leaving false trails and broken branches meant to lure their pursuers away. Hawk had spoken with a meticulous calm, describing the steps they would take, the angles of misdirection. His voice had been steady, but Sarah heard the strain beneath it. The fatigue was sharpening his words, carving away all softness. Hawk moved like a shadow, his presence precise and measured. He had taught her how to listen, how to parse the noises of the forest, until they became a language of their own. Now every twig snap and brush of leaf felt significant. Her world had expanded beyond darkness, her senses stretching to fill the void her eyes could not. "They will come from the west," Hawk said, his voice low and urgent. Their numbers grow. They are like locusts, swarming without purpose but to devour. Sarah clenched her jaw, her heart a pounding drumbeat in her chest. What do we do? We wait, he replied. Strike when their guard is down. Their arrogance is their weakness. And if they find us first, then we do not allow them the satisfaction of an easy victory. His words were stone, unyielding and final. They crouched beneath the tangled roots of a fallen tree, their bodies pressed close to the earth. Hawk's breath was shallow, his injuries from previous nights worsening. Sarah had noticed the stiffness in his movements, the way he clutched his side when he thought she wasn't paying attention. But he had refused her offers to stop, to rest. They both knew what failure would cost them. The sounds of pursuit grew louder as the hours passed. Men's voices barked orders, their accents coarse and grating. Metal clinked against metal. Horses snorted and stamped. Sarah's fingers dug into the dirt, her knuckles white around the knife's handle. She could feel Hawk's tension beside her, a coiled fury held in check only by his discipline. He placed his hand over hers, steadying the tremors that betrayed her fear. Do not think of them as men, he said. Think of them as predators. They will show no mercy. You must offer them none. Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. The rawness in her throat was not from a cold, but from the sheer force of her own resolve. Hawk's words circled her mind, their truth undeniable. This was not a choice. It was survival. The men came crashing through the underbrush, their movements careless and loud. Sarah heard their laughter, the arrogance threaded through each syllable. They were not hunting for her. They were hunting for him, and they believed the task would be simple. Hawk's hand left hers, the loss of his touch as jarring as a blow. She heard the shift of his weight, the whisper of steel as he drew his weapon. His presence moved away from her, fading into the depths of the forest. For a moment, panic seized her. He was leaving her, abandoning her to the darkness. But then his voice drifted back, a ghost carried on the breeze. Do not fear the dark. It is your ally. Sarah forced herself to breathe, her lungs burning with each shallow gasp. Her senses stretched outward, grasping for any hint of Hawk's movements. But he had become part of the wilderness, indistinguishable from the trees and the wind. The first scream shattered the quiet. It was high-pitched, cut short by a brutal finality. Horses neighed in panic, their hooves tearing at the ground. The men shouted, their bravado crumbling into confusion. Another scream, closer this time. The snap of bone, the wet crunch of impact. Hawk's fury was like a storm, sudden and relentless. He struck with the precision of a hawk diving for its prey. His presence felt only when the damage was already done. Sarah crouched lower, her fingers clutching the knife so tightly it hurt. She could do nothing but listen, her own helplessness a torment she could not shake. But then the voices changed, their shouts laced with something deeper than fear. Recognition. There. The girl. She's with him, one of them bellowed. The blind witch. She felt their attention shift, their focus honing in on her like blades. Hawk's assault had been effective, but it had also drawn them straight to her. A twig snapped behind her, too close. She whirled, her knife lashing out on instinct. The blade met flesh, the impact reverberating up her arm. A scream followed, guttural and wounded. Sarah stumbled backward, her breath ragged, her pulse thrumming with wild exhilaration and terror. The man's weight collapsed beside her, his gasping sobs muffled by the ground. Blood seeped into the earth, the metallic tang sharp in her nostrils. She had hurt him, wounded him. The realization coiled within her, fierce and intoxicating. But the others were coming. Their footsteps pounded through the underbrush, their voices sharp and vengeful. Hawk's assault had thinned their numbers, but not broken their will. Sarah pressed herself against the ground, her mind racing. Hawk had taught her to listen, to read the land and its secrets. Now, she strained to do the same with her pursuers. Their anger made them careless. They shouted orders, their words slurred by panic. She shifted, her movements silent. Her fingers found a rock, smooth and solid. She hurled it into the undergrowth, the sound loud and abrupt. The men swiveled, their weapons drawn, their focus torn between imagined threats and real ones. Hawk emerged from the shadows like a creature born of darkness. He moved with lethal grace, his strikes precise and devastating. Another man fell, his scream ending in a sickening gurgle. Hawk's breathing was labored, his injuries slowing him, but his fury had not diminished. Sarah could feel the tide turning. The men's numbers were dwindling, their bravado collapsing under the weight of true danger. But Hawk was faltering, his steps uneven. Blood slicked his hands, his breaths shallow and strained. She stumbled toward him, her knife still clutched in her hand. "Hawk," she cried, her voice raw and desperate. He did not respond. Another man lunged from the trees, his weapon glinting in the dull light. Sarah reacted without thought. The knife slashed through the air, the force of her swing driven by pure, unfiltered terror. The man crumpled at her feet, his body twitching before falling still. The silence that followed was deafening. Hawk's hand found her shoulder, his grip weak but reassuring. "You fought," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "You taught me," she replied, her words trembling with exhaustion and relief. The last of their pursuers had fled, their courage shattered. The wilderness reclaimed its quiet, the bloodshed fading into memory. But Hawk's strength was fading, his body betraying him at last. Sarah guided him to the ground, her hands frantic as she tried to staunch the bleeding. His eyes closed, his breaths shallow but steady. "I will not leave you," she whispered, the words an oath she would keep. Hawk's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "You are stronger than you know," he said, his voice already slipping away. "You have found your way." Sarah's fingers clenched around his hand, her own strength an anchor against the grief threatening to consume her. The forest loomed around them, vast and unforgiving. But she was no longer afraid. The darkness was hers now,